Hey guys, tonight we are heading back to 17th century France, specifically to the most glittering, most over-the-top, and probably most gossip-filled place on earth at the time, the Palace of Versailles. We're going to witness the life of the Sun King, Louis XIV, a man so powerful, so divine, that the sun literally had to get his permission to rise and set. Okay, maybe not literally, but you get the vibe. But you get the very human, very humbling little problem that threatened to topple this whole golden image. It's a reminder that no matter how grand your palace is, you're still stuck with the same basic human hardware. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly means the world. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here. The year is somewhere around 1685. Your carriage wheels crunch over the meticulously raked gravel of the vast courtyard of Versailles. The scale of the place is intentionally overwhelming. It's designed to make you, a visiting noble, feel small, insignificant, like an ant approaching a golden mountain. This isn't just a palace, it's a statement. A statement written in marble, gold leaf, and immense, unapologetic power. You step out, and the first thing that hits you isn't the sight, but the sound, a constant, low hum of human activity. Thousands of people, courtiers, servants, guards, petitioners, artists, all orbiting a single celestial body, the king. The air itself is thick with a strange perfume, a mix of expensive floral scents worn by the aristocrats, the beeswax polishing the floors, and let's be honest, the less than pleasant reality of 17th century sanitation. It's a complex cocktail of glamour and grime. You follow the flow of richly dressed people, their silk and brocade outfits rustling like a forest of expensive leaves. Your destination is the heart of this universe, the Hall of Mirrors. As you step inside, you have to consciously stop yourself from gaping. It's less a hallway and more a tunnel of pure light and wealth. On one side, massive windows look out onto the sprawling, geometric perfection of the gardens. On the other, 357 mirrors, a staggering luxury at the time, capture that light and throw it back, multiplying it, creating a dazzling, almost divine glow. The ceiling above you is a dizzying epic of painted propaganda depicting Louis himself as a Roman emperor, a god, a conqueror. This is the main artery of court life. It's where you come to see and, more importantly, to be seen. And there, at the center of it all, is him, Louis XIV, the Sun King. HES, not just a man, HES, a living performance. You watch as he proceeds through the hall, and the entire room moves with him, a human tide parting and closing around his presence. His daily life is a public ritual. His waking up, the lever, is a ceremony attended by the highest-ranking nobles, who feel privileged just to watch him put on his royal shirt. His going to bed, the calcar, is the same. It's the 17th century equivalent of an influencer's meticulously curated 24-8 stream, except the filter is made of solid gold. One of the most peculiar rules you have to learn quickly is that you must never, ever turn your back on the king. This leads to the slightly comical sight of dukes and counts awkwardly shuffling backwards out of his presence, trying to look graceful while avoiding tripping over their own high-heeled shoes. Here's a little tidbit for you: the hierarchy was so intense it even dictated who could sit and on what. In the presence of the queen, a whole world of ambition, intrigue, and heartbreak could revolve around who got that stool. But as you observe this flawless, godlike figure, you can't help but wonder about the man inside the golden costume. Is this all a calculated act of political genius? A way to domesticate a once rebellious nobility of etiquette and competition? Or has he been playing the part for so long that he genuinely believes he is the semi-divine center of the universe? Historians still argue about this. They debate whether Louis was a master puppeteer, fully aware of the strings he was pulling, or if he was the first and most devoted believer in his own myth. As the king moves past, perhaps he pauses for a moment to sit on a temporary throne set up for a brief audience. He is the picture of absolute authority, his posture erect, his gaze unwavering. But if you look closely, you might see something. A flicker in his eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, a slight, almost invisible shift of his weight on the brocaded cushion, as if trying to find a position that offers a moment's relief. It's nothing really, a ghost of a sensation, but a tiny crack in the perfect, polished marble of his divine image. A private, mortal discomfort in the most public of men. That fleeting moment of discomfort you witnessed in the Hall of Mirrors was just the tip of the iceberg. Now the performance is over, the courtiers have dispersed into their own little orbits of Tottenham flirtation, and you are behind the gilded doors of the king's private apartments. The public mask of the Sun King is off, and the private man, Louis, remains. The silence here is different. It's not empty, it's heavy with the unspoken pressures of absolute rule. He sits, not on a throne, but in a plush armchair, the firelight dancing on the intricate wood paneling. And here, alone, the pain is no longer a flicker. It's a presence. A dull, throbbing, insistent companion, but has taken up residence in the most undignified part of his royal person. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A mild ache, probably from spending 10 hours in the saddle during the royal hunt. Louis, after all, is a man of immense physical stamina. His love for hunting is legendary. It's not just a sport for him. It's a vital expression of his energy and dominance over nature itself. He can outride, outlast, and outshoot almost any man in his court. Surely, a little soreness is the price of such virility. But the ache didn't fade. It settled in. It became a low, constant hum of discomfort beneath the symphony of his daily life. Imagine you are him, presiding over the state council. Your ministers are debating the complex finances of the kingdom, the fortifications on the frontier, the delicate doubts of European alliances. You are the final arbiter. Your word is law. Your mind needs to be a razor, dissecting every argument. But as your minister of war drones on, your focus is pulled away by that hot, grinding pressure. You subtly shift your weight on the velvet cushion, a movement so small no one would notice, but to you, it's a desperate gambit for a moment's peace. It's a tiny, private battle being fought under the council table while you project an aura of unshakable calm. Then there are the meals. The king's appetite is famously gargantuan. You sit at a table groaning with dozens of dishes, a public spectacle of consumption meant to symbolize the wealth and bounty of France. Course after course arrives, but now, sitting for the long, ritualized dinner becomes an exercise in endurance. The pain is a thief, stealing the pleasure from the food, replacing it with a nagging, unwelcome distraction. Here's a little piece of 17th century context. The body of the king was not his own. It was a symbol of the state. His health was the health of France. A sick king was a weak king, an omen of instability and misfortune. So this isn't just a personal health issue for you, it's a potential state secret, a political liability. The very idea of admitting to a weakness, especially one so base, so far removed from the glorious portraits and poetic odes, it feels like a betrayal, not by a courtier or a foreign power, but by his own body. Pinpointing the exact moment when the king knew this was more than a passing ache is something historians still try to reconstruct from the fragmented coups in letters and court journals. There was no single event, but a slow, creeping realization. He likely tried all the gentlemanly remedies of the day. Perhaps a change in diet, more rest, or different saddle padding. He was, by all accounts, a man who believed in the power of his own will. A man who built Versailles out of a swampy marshland surely could command his own flesh and blood to obey. But this enemy was different. It was an internal insurgency, and it was winning. The worst part is the loneliness of it. You are surrounded by thousands of people, yet you are utterly alone with this secret. Who could you even tell? How do you, the Sun King, the embodiment of divine right, turn to a servant or a minister and speak of a persistent, humiliating pain in your rear? The language itself feels treasonous. It chips away at the carefully constructed mythology. Gods don't get these kinds of problems. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, the pain becomes your shadow. It's there when you wake for the lever, a grim morning greeting. It's there when you walk the gardens, turning the beauty of the fountains and parterres into a blur. And it's there at night, when the palace is quiet, making sleep a fleeting, precious commodity. The sun has set on the kingdom, and for the first time, a shadow has fallen over the Sun King himself. A shadow he can no longer ignore. The time for silent endurance is ending. The time for a dreadful, whispered confession is about to begin. The pain has now become an undeniable tyrannical force in the king's life. The subtle shifts in his chair are no longer enough. The private battle must now, reluctantly, involve others. But who do you call when God's chosen representative on earth has a problem in a place no one dares to name? You call the A-team of 17th century French medicine the royal physicians. Let's be very clear about who these men are. They are not the white-coated scientists we think of today. You are now in a room with a handful of the most learned, most utterly terrified men in France. At the top of the pyramid is Antoine d'Aquin, the king's premier medicine, his first physician. This is a man of immense influence and prestige. He is a scholar, steeped in the ancient wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates. He understands the body as a system of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health is the perfect balance of these humors. Sickness is an imbalance. The entire goal of medicine, as he sees it, is to restore that delicate equilibrium. So when you, the king, finally hint at your indisposition, d'Aquin and his colleagues spring into a very specific, traditional, and to our modern eyes completely ineffective kind of action. Their first instinct is not to examine you. Oh, heavens no. The king's body is sacrosanct. The idea of a physical examination, especially of that region, is a breach of protocol so immense it's barely conceivable. Instead, they consult their books. They engage in learned, philosophical debate. They observe you from a respectful distance, noting your color, your mood, your appetite. And then they prescribe the standard treatments of the era. Their toolkit is limited, but they use it with great confidence. First come the purges and enemas. The logic is simple. If there's a problem in the lower regions, it must be due to some blockage or accumulation of bad humors. The solution of bad humors. The solution, first the system, who commands armies and dictates treaties, are subjected to a series of frankly exhausting and dehydrating procedures, all in the name of rebalancing your royal humors. When that doesn't work, they move on to another favorite tool: bloodletting. A small incision is made, and a prescribed amount of royal blood is drained. This was considered the Swiss Army knife of 17th century medicine, good for everything from fevers to melancholy. The theory was that it would reduce inflammation and remove excess humors that were causing the problem. So now you're not only in pain, but you're also weaker. The real panic begins to set in for the physicians when these trusted, time-honored methods fail. Week after week, they apply their remedies, and week after week, you report no improvement. In fact, you're getting worse. This is where their professional confidence starts to crack and morph into existential dread. Their entire careers, their reputations, their fortunes are tied to your well-being. A healthy king is a testament to their skill. A sick king, especially one who doesn't respond to treatment, is a walking, talking indictment of their failure. The silent fear in their eyes is palpable. They've run out of theories. Their ancient books have failed them. Here's a little tidbit on the medical hierarchy. The physicians were the aristocrats of the medical world. They were university-educated men who dealt in theory and diagnosis. They rarely got their hands dirty. Below them were the apothecaries who mixed the potions, and at the very bottom of the ladder were the barber surgeons. These were the manual laborers of medicine, the men who pulled teeth, set bones, and lanced boils. The physicians looked down on the surgeons with a kind of academic snobbery. To them, surgery was a messy, brutal craft, not a noble science. The debate over what exactly was wrong with you, the king, without ever properly looking, is a subject of much scholarly speculation. Historians piece it together from the physician's own frightened notes and the gossip of court diarists. They likely threw around a lot of vague, important-sounding Latin terms. Perhaps they called it a melancholic obstruction, or a heated congestion, or a heated congestion of the lower humors. Anything was better than admitting they were stumped. The tension in the royal bedchamber during these consultations must have been unbearable. Imagine the scene: you, lying in your magnificent bed, the damask curtains drawn. The physicians stand in a somber cluster, whispering in hushed tones, their faces grave. They feel your pulse not just to check your health, but as a ritual of concern. They prescribe poultices and plasters made of all sorts of strange and wonderful ingredients, some involving herbs, others involving things like pigeon dung or frog spawn, concoctions that were more magical thinking than medicine. Each new plaster applied to the royal backside is a shot in the dark, a desperate prayer disguised as a prescription. And with each failure, the unspoken question hangs heavier in the air: what if we can't fix this? What if the Sun King's light is being dimmed by a problem our medicine cannot reach? The panic is no longer silent. It's a deafening roar in the ears of the men meant to have all the answers. The poultices have failed. The purges have only added to your misery. The bloodletting has left you pale beneath your regal tan. The king's first physician, dear Quinn, is out of options from his esteemed medical playbook. The time for scholarly theories and humoral philosophy is over. The moment everyone has been dreading has arrived. They need to call in a surgeon. This is a huge step, and a deeply humiliating one for the physicians. It's a tacit admission of their own impotence. Calling a surgeon is like a grand architect admitting he can't fix a leaky roof and has to call a plumber. The man summoned to the royal bedchamber is Charles Francois Felix de Thiassy, the king's premier chirurgien or first surgeon. But don't let the fancy title fool you. In the rigid hierarchy of the court, Felix is a glorified craftsman, HES respected for his skill with a blade, but he is not a gentleman scholar like dear Quinn, who works with his hands. Felix enters the room and the atmosphere shifts. HES a different breed from the physicians. HES practical, direct, and probably a little intimidated to be in this inner sanctum. He carries with him not a book of ancient Greek theories, but a case of cold, hard steel instruments. After a hushed, tense briefing from the physicians, who are likely trying to save face by using as much Latin as possible, Felix is granted the unthinkable privilege and the terrifying responsibility of actually examining the king. Imagine the scene. The Sun King, the center of the known universe whose waking, unsleeping, or public ceremonies, must now submit to an intimate and deeply embarrassing physical examination. The heavy curtains are drawn, creating a small, private world of dread within the grandeur of the bedroom. Only a few people are present: the anxious physicians, a trusted valet, and the surgeon. Felix, you, as the king, have to swallow your pride, a lump far larger and more bitter than any medicinal concoction you've been forced to drink. Felix is professional, his hands surprisingly gentle for a man used to the brutal work of 17th century surgery. He conducts his examination, and the silence in the room is absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire. And then he delivers the diagnosis. He doesn't cloak it in scholarly jargon. He uses a simple, ugly, terrifying word: fistula. Let's pause here to understand what this actually means. It's an abnormal tunnel that develops between the inside of the anal canal and the skin on the outside. It's often the result of an abscess, an infection that hasn't healed properly. It's painful, it constantly leaks pus and other unpleasant fluids. And it will not heal on its own. It's the kind of ailment that is miserable for anyone, but for a man whose entire existence is built on an image of perfection and divine authority, it's a catastrophe. The diagnosis hangs in the air, a stink bomb of reality dropped into the perfumed atmosphere of Versailles. The reaction is a wave of secret, controlled panic. For you, the king, it's a confirmation of your worst fears. This isn't a fleeting humor or a temporary blockage. It's a structural flaw, a physical defect. For the physicians, it's a mixture of relief and horror. Relief, because now the problem has a name, and, more importantly, it's a surgical problem. It's a surgical problem. It's officially out of their hands and in Felix's. Horror, because the only known cure for fistula is surgery, and surgery on the anus of the King of France in 1696 is something that has never been done. It's uncharted territory, fraught with risks of infection, catastrophic bleeding, and unimaginable pain. Historians still debate the precise emotional and political shockwaves of this moment. Did the king despair? Did he fly into a rage at the indignity of it? All accounts suggest Louis, ever the master of self-control, received the news with a stoic, icy calm. But inside, the foundations of his world must have been shaking. His body, the symbol of France, was broken. And what about the fistula itself? Here's a little known, slightly gross detail. The fistula had been developing for months. To manage the constant leakage and hide it from the court, the royal vedets had to become masters of discretion, helping the king with constant changes of underlinens and using pads of linen to absorb the discharge. The sheer effort to maintain the illusion of normalcy while dealing with this messy, chronic condition is staggering. It adds another layer of performance to the king's already theatrical life. He wasn't just acting the part of a god, he was actively concealing a deeply human, deeply humbling frailty. The diagnosis is now a state secret of the highest order. The word fistula is whispered only in the most secure chambers of the palace. The fate of the king, and by extension the stability of France, now rests not on his armies or his ministers, but on the dreaded, unspoken possibility of a knife. The grand golden narrative of the Sun King has taken a dark, septic tone. The diagnosis has been made. The dreaded word fistula is now the most dangerous secret in all of France. And the man at the center of the storm is no longer the physician Diaquin, but the surgeon Charles Francois or Felix. So, who is this guy? To understand the weight on his shoulders, you have to understand where he fits into the world of 17th century France. And let me tell you, it's not at the top of the food chain. Let's take a little field trip away from the gilded halls of Versailles and into the bustling, messy streets of Paris. This is where you'd typically find a man like Felix at work. You're standing in a modest shop. The sign outside might have a drawing of a razor and a tooth. This is the realm of the barber surgeon. Inside, it smells of soap, medicinal herbs, and faintly, of blood. Men are getting shaved and having their wigs powdered on one side of the room. Someone is groaning as a surgeon lances a boil or sets a broken bone. This is the world Felix comes from. In the 17th century, surgeons were not seen as sophisticated medical professionals. They were manual craftsmen. They belonged to a guild, just like carpenters, weavers, or stonemasons. They learned their trade through apprenticeship, not through university education like the physicians. They were the guys you called for the go-to work amputations on the battlefield, removing bladder stones, pulling teeth, and treating the kinds of wounds and injuries that the high-minded physicians wouldn't touch. Theirs was a world of saws, knives, and cauterizing irons. They were practical. They were skilled with their hands, but they were not considered gentlemen. The prevailing view was that physicians thought, and surgeons did, and doing in this context often meant cutting. So, for Felix to be summoned to the king's bedside was already a huge deal. But to be told he might have to perform a novel and incredibly dangerous operation on the monarch, that's a whole different level of pressure. This wasn't just a career-defining moment, it was a life-defining one. If he succeeds, he could achieve fame and fortune beyond his wildest dreams. But if he fails, if the king dies from the operation, from infection, from the sheer shock and pain, Felix won't just be fired. He'd be lucky to escape with his life. He could be blamed for regicide, torn apart by an angry mob, his family disgraced for generations. The stakes are absolute. Let's talk about Felix himself. He wasn't some back alley butcher. He held the position of the king's first surgeon, which meant he was the best of the best in his field. He had likely proven his skill and steady hand many times on lesser nobles or in military campaigns. But this was Louis XIV. This was different. The king wasn't just a patient, he was a divine symbol. Cutting into his flesh was, in a way, a form of sacrilege. There's a fascinating debate among historians about the relationship between the king and his surgeon. Did Louis trust Felix implicitly, or was he terrified? Placing his life in the hands of a man from a lower social and professional class, the records suggest a surprising degree of professional respect. Louis was a pragmatist. He had seen the physicians fail with their theories. Now he was faced with a physical problem that required a physical solution. He needed a craftsman, not a philosopher, and Felix was the best craftsman available. Here's a curious detail about the era's surgical practices: anesthesia did not exist. There was no way to numb the patient. The best a surgeon could offer was a swig of brandy, a piece of leather to bite down on, and the promise to be quick. that by their speed, a good surgeon was a fast surgeon. The patient's ability to endure the agony was a critical part of the equation. And now Felix was contemplating performing a delicate, precise operation in a highly sensitive area on the most powerful man in the world, who would be awakened feeling every single cut. So, you can imagine Felix in the days after the diagnosis. He goes back to his own chambers, the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders. He lays out his instruments, probes, scalpels, scissors. They seem crude, brutal. He probably replays the examination in his mind 1,000 times. He knows the anatomy, but he also knows the risks. The area is rich with blood vessels. A slip of the knife could mean uncontrollable bleeding. It's also an area prone to infection, and in a world before germ theory, a post-operative infection was a death sentence. Felix saying no to the king. But saying yes means gambling with his own life, the king's life, and the stability of France. The humble surgeon, the man of steel and sinew, has been given a problem that would make the most arrogant physician tremble. The fate of the Sun King now lies in his very human, very fallible hands. Felix has his diagnosis, and he knows the only solution is the knife. But he can't just walk into the king's bedroom and start cutting. This isn't just any surgery, it's a potential act of regicide if it goes wrong. He needs a plan. More than that, he needs practice. You don't just drive a brand new experimental procedure on the King of France. So begins one of the most curious and clandestine episodes in this whole affair. Under the utmost secrecy, Felix is given a royal mandate and a bag of money to do something unprecedented. He is to perfect the surgical technique for a fistula repair before ever laying a hand on the king. This means he has to find people with the exact same condition and operate on them. It's a secret, state-sponsored clinical trial, 17th century style. You have to imagine Felix and his assistants scouring the city of Paris. Where do you find a steady supply of anal fistulas? You go to the places where people are poor, desperate, and suffering in silence. You go to the charity hospitals, the almshouses, maybe even the prisons. These institutions are filled with people whose ailments are as chronic and neglected as their poverty. For them, a fistula is just one more misery in a life full of them. Now, picture yourself as one of these unfortunate Parisians. You've been living with this painful, messy, shameful condition for years. You have no hope of a cure. Suddenly, a well-dressed man, a surgeon from the court, approaches you. He makes an offer. He wants to perform a new, experimental surgery on you. It will be painful, he admits, but it might cure you. And, here's the kicker, you will be paid for your trouble. You might even be offered a pension if you survive. This is an offer that's impossible to refuse. It's a lottery ticket, and the price is your own body. So, one by one, these fistula bearers, as they were grimly called, are quietly brought to a dedicated ward, likely in a hospital at Versailles or a discreet location in Paris, away from prying eyes. This is where Felix sets up his secret workshop. He turns a hospital ward into his personal research and development lab. This is where he will forge his technique. The scene inside this ward must have been a grim one. A row of beds, each occupied by a man who has gambled his life for a few coins and a chance at relief. Felix would have operated on them, one after the other. Each operation is a lesson. He would try slightly different approaches, different cuts. He is essentially learning on the job. Some historians suggest he operated on as many as 75 different men. That number itself is a topic of debate, but the existence of this trial is well documented. With each procedure, Felix refines his method. He learns the exact landscape of the tissues, the best angle for the incision to promote healing, the depth he needs to cut. He is also, and this is crucial, designing the tools for the job. The standard surgical instruments of the day are not quite right. They are too clumsy, too brutal for this delicate work. So Felix begins to collaborate with a cutler, a master craftsman of blades, to create specialized tools. This is where the story gets even more fascinating. He's not just doing surgery, he's an inventor. He designs a new type of scalpel curved just so, to navigate the difficult terrain. He creates a special probe, slender and flexible, to explore the fistula's path without causing unnecessary damage. These aren't just knives, they are precision instruments, prototypes for the great operation. A little-known fact is that these new tools were often made of silver. Silver was not only a sign of the project's royal prestige, but some at the time also believed it had properties that made it cleaner or better for healing, a faint, almost accidental echo of the anti-imbrickable properties we know silver has today. Think about the psychological pressure on Felix. Each time he operates, he's not just thinking about the poor man on the table in front of him. He's picturing the king. Every groan of pain from his test subjects is a preview of what the monarch would endure. Every success gives him a bit more confidence. Every failure, every complication, and there must have been complications, like infection or poor healing, is a terrifying omen. The weight of his secret project is immense. HES, not just a surgeon, HES, the director of a covert RD program, where the product is a single, perfect surgical performance. Meanwhile, back at Versailles, the official story is that the king is being treated with conservative methods. The court is a hotbed of rumor, but the true nature of the coming storm is known only to a tiny, select circle. The fate of the Sun King is being decided not in a council of war, but in a hidden hospital ward, on the bodies of anonymous, forgotten men. While Felix is busy in his secret surgical lab, practicing on the unfortunate souls of Paris, another crucial part of the plan is unfolding in a different kind of workshop. This isn't a place of flesh and blood, but of fire and metal. Felix's research and development wasn't just about technique, it was about technology. He couldn't perform a 21st century operation with 17th century tools. He needed an upgrade. So you find yourself in the smoky, noisy workshop of a master cutler in Paris. This is one of the best metal workers in the kingdom, a man whose skill with forging, sharpening, and polishing steel is renowned. He has been given a top-secret, high-stakes commission, though he probably only knows part of the truth. He likely knows the instruments offer a surgeon of great importance for a procedure of great delicacy. He may or may not have known the identity of the final patient, but the quality of the materials and the secrecy demanded would have told him this was no ordinary job. Felix is here, collaborating directly with the craftsman. He brings sketches, ideas born from the grim experience of his practiced surgeries. The standard bits are wise to thick. He might say, I need a blade that is thinner, with a gentler curve like a crescent moon. He is designing, eye tracing, and prototyping. This is bespoke surgical design. Let's look at what they're making. The star of the show is the royal probe. This isn't just a simple metal stick. It's a long, slender, and flexible instrument, likely made of pure silver. Its purpose is to be gently inserted into the fistula tract, to map its precise path and depth, before any cutting begins. It's the surgeon's eyes, his guide through the treacherous internal landscape. Another key invention is the Bista à la Royale, the royal scalpel. It's an elegant, almost delicate-looking knife, a far cry from the brutish saws and cleavers often associated with this era. It has a specially curved blade designed to lay open the entire fistula tunnel in one single, fluid motion. The goal is to make a clean, open channel that can then heal from the inside out. And then there are the scissors. Not your ordinary scissors, but specially designed surgical scissors with long handles and angled blades, allowing Felix to trim the edges of the wound with precision, removing any unhealthy tissue that might impede healing. The level of thought going into the ergonomics and specific function of each tool is truly remarkable for the time. One of the most fascinating undebated aspects of these instruments is their material. Many were made of silver. Why silver is mentioned, some historians point to a nascent, almost superstitious belief in silver being cleaner. There was no germ theory, but perhaps there was an empirical observation that wounds treated with certain metals fared better. Others argue it was purely for prestige. These were not just tools, they were jewels. They were being made to touch the body of the king. They had to be worthy of the honor. They needed to be beautiful, gleaming, and almost sacred objects, transforming a brutal act of cutting into a refined, royal procedure. The sheer psychological power of a surgeon holding a beautiful, purpose-built silver scalpel, rather than a common iron knife, cannot be underestimated. It lent an air of control, sophistication, and importance to the whole terrifying endeavor. Imagine the craftsman at his forge. He heats the silver until it glows, then carefully hammers it into the shape dictated by Felix. He tempers the steel for the scalpel blades, seeking the perfect balance between hardness and flexibility. He polishes the finished instruments until they shine like mirrors. He works in secret, probably at 9, but a single loose word about his project could have dire consequences. The tools are then presented to Felix, who inspects them with the critical eye of a master. He might test the scalpel's edge on a piece of parchment, feel the weight and balance of the probe in his hand. These are not just medical devices, they are the physical embodiment of all of Felix's research. Every curve, every ounce of weight, is the result of his grim trials. The ghosts of those 75 anonymous Parisians are forged into the very metal of these instruments. They are, in a sense, weapons designed for a single, specific battle. A battle that will take place in the king's bedchamber. As the set of instruments is completed, it is likely placed in a magnificent, custom-made case, lined with velvet. It would look like a case for a priceless necklace or a set of dueling pistols. When closed, it hides its terrifying purpose under a veneer of luxury. But Felix knows what's inside. It's his toolkit of salvation or ruin. The stage is almost set. The surgeon has practiced his lines, and now his custom-made props are ready. While Felix perfects his technique and his silver tools are being forged in secrecy, the world outside the operating ward and the cutler's shop doesn't stand still. The court at Versailles is a living, breathing organism, and its lifeblood is information, or more often, a lack thereof. The king's indisposition is the biggest story in this closed-off world, and since no one has the facts, they do what courtiers do best: they speculate, they gossip, and they plot. You're back in the Hall of Mirrors, but the atmosphere is different now. The dazzling light seems a little harsher, the golden splendor a little colder. The king's public appearances have become less frequent. When he is seen, he looks pale and tired. He sits more than he stands. The official line, carefully managed by his ministers, is that the king is suffering from a bout of fatigue or perhaps a stubborn sciatica. These are respectable, almost noble ailments for a man of his age and activity, but nobody really believes it. The court is a tinderbox of ambition, and the king's perceived weakness is the spark. You watch as factions begin to coalesce in the corners of the grand salons. Whispers are the currency of the realm. You see a duke whose star has been fading, speaking in hushed tones with a disgruntled military commander. Are they merely exchanging pleasantries, or are they testing the waters, gauging each other's loyalty in a potential future? Without a strong Lewis at the helm, every conversation is layered with hidden meaning. The king's brother, Philippe, the Duke of Orleans, becomes a figure of intense scrutiny. He is the next in line to the throne, should the worst happen. You see him holding his own little court, and the crowd around him seems to be growing larger, more sycophantic. Is he actively plotting? Probably not. The historical consensus is that Philippe was largely loyal, but his very existence becomes a focal point for the anxieties and ambitions of others. Those who feel they have been overlooked by Louis might now start paying more attention to his brother, hedging their bets. It's a dangerous game of political foresight. Then there's the international stage. The news of the king's poor health, no matter how well guarded, inevitably leaks out. Ambassadors from Spain, from England, from the Holy Roman Empire are writing coded letters back to their home courts. Is the great Sun King, the dominant force in European politics for decades, finally faltering? A weakened France could shift the entire balance of power. Treaties that were held together by the force of Louis's personality might now seem fragile. Old enemies might feel emboldened. The king's fistula isn't just a medical issue, it's a geopolitical event. One of the most intense rumor mills would have been centered around the king's unofficial wife, the Marquise de Maintenon. She is the most trusted person in Louis's inner circle. She controls access to the king. Therefore, her mood, her words, her very expression are analyzed with Talmudic intensity. If she looks worried, the court panics. If she projects confidence, a wave of relief washes through the palace, and the courtiers try every trick to pry a little piece of it from her or her attendants. Here's a peculiar aspect of court life that fueled the fire idleness. The nobility at Versailles had been deliberately stripped of their old feudal powers. Their main job was simply to be at court to attend to the king. This left them with an enormous amount of free time, which they filled with gambling, love affairs, and above all gossip. The king's health was the perfect subject. It was dramatic, important, and shrouded in mystery. A comical scene of marquises and barons who knew nothing of medicine arguing about the king's humors. Was it a disease of the liver, a problem of the vapors? The theories would get more and more outlandish. The historical record on this period is fascinating because it's pieced together from so many different sources: the official court gazette, which says nothing, and the private diaries and letters of courtiers, which say everything. These diarists, like the famous Saint Simon, though his most detailed accounts were written a bit later, are our fly-on-the-wall observers. They record the shifting alliances, the nervous whispers, the palpable tension that grips the golden cage of Versailles. They chronicle the fear that the sun, which had shone so brightly and so long over France, might be setting. The gossip is not just idle chatter, it's the sound of a political system holding its breath, waiting to see if its center will hold. Let's step away from the whispering galleries and political machinations of the court and return to the man at the center of it all. We need to go inside the king's own mind, because while his kingdom is fretting about the stability of France, you, as Louis, are fighting a profound battle. It's a war being waged between your body, your mind, and the colossal public image you spent a lifetime constructing. You are in your private chapel. The stained glass windows throw muted, jeweled light onto the marble floor. This is a place of supposed peace, a direct line to the God who, you have been told your entire life, chose you to be his instrument on earth. You are the most Christian king, the defender of the faith. Your authority is not just political, it is divine. You are not a king by accident of birth, but by the will of God himself. This belief is the bedrock of your entire existence. And yet here you are, brought low by a condition so mortifying, so base. It feels like a cosmic joke. The pain is a constant, humbling reminder of your own flesh and blood, your own mortality. How do you reconcile being God's chosen vessel with a body that seems determined to betray you with such a foul, earthly ailment? This is the core of your internal struggle. It's a theological crisis wrapped in a medical one. You kneel, but even the act of kneeling on the plush velvet cushion is a carefully negotiated truce with the pain. Your prayers, once confident declarations of a king in partnership with God, are now likely tinged with a desperate questioning tone. Why this humiliation? Is it a test of your faith, a punishment for some unknown sin? For a man who sees divine providence in every victory on the battlefield, it's impossible not to see a divine message in this personal suffering. But what is the message? The pressure to maintain the facade is immense. Every morning, during the lever ceremony, you have to put on the mask of the Sun King. As dozens of the highest-ranking nobles watch your every move, you must act as if nothing is wrong. You must project strength, vitality, and unwavering authority. It's the performance of a lifetime. You discuss matters of state. You approve architectural plans for the continued expansion of Versailles. You dictate letters, all while a hot, sharp pain is your silent companion. The concentration required is superhuman. There's a debate among historians about the psychological impact this had on Louis. Some argue it was this period of suffering that deepened his personal piety, making him more devout and introspective in his later years. Others suggest it was a purely pragmatic crisis. He saw the political danger and was focused solely on survival and preserving his power. The truth is likely a mixture of both. He was a deeply religious man and a master politician. His faith and his pragmatism were not separate, they were intertwined. Let's consider his relationship with his own body. Louis had always been a man of great physical presence and pride. He was an excellent dancer in his youth, a tireless hunter, and a skilled horseman. He even participated in and won mock jousting tournaments at court. His physical prowess was part of his royal charisma. Now, his body has become his enemy. It's a source of shame and weakness. He who mastered the rebellious French nobility, cannot master his own tissue. This loss of control must have been maddening. Here's a small but telling detail. Louis was known for his remarkable self-control. He rarely showed anger or frustration in public. He was famous for his emotional discipline. Now, Imagine that iron will being tested, moment by moment, by a relentless internal tormentor. The effort to remain plastic on the outside while a fire rages on the inside is a form of psychological torture. He is living a dual existence, the serene Sun King in public, and a man in agony in private. This inner turmoil is perhaps best understood through his interactions with the few people who knew the truth. His valet, who helped him manage the physical reality of his condition. His unofficial wife, Madame de Maintenon, who provided spiritual and emotional support. And his surgeon, Felix. In these private moments, the mask could slip. He could be vulnerable, perhaps even afraid. The decision to proceed with the surgery is not just a medical one, it's a profound leap of faith. He is placing his life, his crown, and his divine mandate into the hands of a craftsman with a knife. He has to conquer his own fear, his own pride, and submit to the surgeon's blade. For a man who has never had to submit to anyone, this may have been the hardest battle of his life. The autumn leaves are turning golden crimson in the gardens of Versailles, mirroring the opulence of the palace itself. But inside, the mood is anything but golden. The secret can no longer be contained by poultices or prayers. The king's pain is worsening, his public appearances are becoming a visible strain, and Felix, the surgeon, has reported that he is as ready as he will ever be. You are in a small private council. The room is lavish, but the atmosphere is clinical and grim. Present are only the most essential figures. You, the king, sits stiffly in a high-backed chair. There is your physician, dear Quim, looking grim, his theoretical medicine having been defeated. There is the Marquis de Louvois, your powerful minister of war, a man who thinks in terms of logistics and risk, now applying that mind to this strange, internal battlefield. His face a mask of professional calm that betrays the frantic beating of his heart. And of course the ever-present, ever-calm Madame de Maintenon, your confidant, her presence a silent source of strength. This is the meeting where the final decision is made. Felix makes his case. He speaks not in the philosophical terms of the physicians, but with the direct, blunt language of his craft. He explains what he must do: lay the fistula tract completely open. He describes the instruments he has designed. He cannot promise that you will survive the pain or the subsequent infection. He can only promise that to do nothing is to guarantee a slow, miserable decline, terrifying choice, the near certainty of agony versus the certainty of decay. You listen, your face impassive. This is a moment that showcases the core of Louis's character. He is not a man to dither. He has built his reign on decisive action. He listens to the advice, weighs the unprecedented risks, and then he makes his choice. The word is given: the surgery will proceed. A date is set November 18th, 1686. The decision sends a silent shockwave through the room. It's real now. A point of no return has been crossed. Now begins the intricate and secretive process of stage managing the event. The operation must be a complete secret to the wider court and the public. Any hint of what is about to happen could cause a panic, tank the national credit, and invite for an aggression. So a cover story is meticulously crafted. The court is informed that the king will be retiring to his chambers for a week of rest. It's announced that he will not be holding his usual audiences or councils. The day before the surgery, Louis carries out his public duties with flawless composure. He attends mass, he walks in the gardens. He presides over a council meeting. He is acting, performing the role of a healthy king one last time before the curtain falls. The choice of location for the surgery is itself a subject of historical interest. They don't take you to a hospital or even a dedicated surgical theater. That would be too public, too difficult to conceal. The operation will take place in your own bedchamber. The most famous bedroom in the world is about to be converted into a makeshift operating room. This decision is both practical and symbolic. You will face this ordeal in the very heart of your own power, the epicenter of your kingdom. As the date approaches, Versailles is cloaked in a bizarre, tense quiet. The courtiers, accustomed to the constant rhythm of royal ceremony, are at a loose end. They know something is afoot, but they don't know what. The official story of rest feels thin. The palace, usually buzzing with energy, is now adrift in a sea of rumor and anxious boredom. Here's a little detail that highlights the secrecy to prevent anyone from knowing. Felix and his small team of assistants were reportedly brought into the king's apartments through a series of private, back corridors, possibly at dawn, when the palace was at its quietest. For you, Louis, these last days and hours must be a period of intense mental preparation. You are preparing for a battle, as real as any you have sent your armies to fight. There is evidence that you spent a great deal of time in prayer with Madame de Maintenon. You also put your affairs in order, a quiet acknowledgement of the very real possibility that you might not survive. You are facing your own mortality, stripped of all the divine trappings. On the night of November 17th, a strange calm descends. The great palace of Versailles, that monument to eternal glory and power, holds its breath. The Sun King is about to go into eclipse, and no one knows if the light will ever return. The decision has been made. The stage is set. The dawn is coming, and with it, the gleam of a silver scalpel. The dawn of November 18th breaks grey and cold over Versailles. The light that seeps through the tiny gaps in the heavy brocade curtains of your bedchamber seems reluctant, timid. Normally, this room would be stirring with the first rituals of the lever, the carefully choreographed ceremony of your waking. Dukes and princes would be assembling outside, vying for the honor of watching you emerge from sleep. But this morning, there's only a profound, heavy silence. Your vast, ornate bed, a masterpiece of gilded carving and velvet, stands empty. You are not in it. Instead, you are lying face down on a much smaller, harder mattress placed on a low trestle in the middle of the room. This simple, almost crude setup is a stark island of clinical reality in an ocean of royal splendor. The change is deliberate. It puts you at the correct height for the surgeon to work. You are dressed not in your royal nightshirt of silk and lace, but in a simple linen garment. The Sun King has been stripped down to the man. The room is warm, a large fire crackling in the hearth. But the fire is not just for comfort. It's a workbench. Resting near the flames are several iron instruments, a grim reminder of the cauterizing that might be needed. This is pre-antibiotic against infection and bleeding. There are only a handful of people in the room, and their presence is a study in controlled tension. In a corner, her face pale but her posture erect, is Madame de Maintenon. She is not weeping or wringing her hands. She is a statue of piety, her lips moving in a silent, constant prayer. She is your spiritual anchor in this terrifying sea. Near her stands the Marquis de Louvois, your minister, his expression unreadable. He is not here for emotional support. He is here as a representative of the state, a witness. His presence underlines that this is not a private medical procedure, it is an event of national importance. And then there is the physician, dear Quinn. He stands off to one side, a spectator at a drama he could not prevent. His theoretical medicine has been superseded by the brutal pragmatism of the knife. He is a ghost at this feast of steel. But your focus and every onus is on one man, Charles Francois Felix. He is not rushing. He moves with a calm, deliberate economy of motion that is both reassuring and terrifying. He has a small table next to your mattress, covered with a clean white cloth. Upon it, he carefully lays out his instruments. The silver tools you commissioned, the ones born from his secret experiments, now gleam in the firelight. The crescent-shaped scalpel, the slender probe, the angled scissors, they are beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. He checks each one, running a thumb near but not touching the blade, feeling its balance. The soft, metallic clink as he places them on the cloth is the only sound that cuts through the thick silence. What is going through your mind in these final moments? This is a question historians still passionately debate. Are you the stoic, godlike king, meeting your fate with the same iron where you used to govern your kingdom? Are you the devout Christian, placing your life in God's hands, accepting this trial as part of a divine plan? Or are you, beneath the placid surface, simply a man paralyzed by sheer, mortal terror? Your famous self-control, a mask for a mind screaming in silent panic? Perhaps it is all three at once. You lie still, your breathing even. You offer no word of fear, no cry for comfort. You simply wait. Felix is ready. He has washed his hands, a practice not common for hygiene reasons, but more as a ritual of preparation. He exchanges a brief, silent glance with Madame de Maintenon. It's a look of shared responsibility, of shared dread. His two assistants move into position. Their job not just to pass instruments, but to hold you, the king, steady if the pain should make you thrive. This is the precipice, the culmination of months of secret pain, of failed remedies, of clandestine research and whispered fears. The entire vast, glittering enterprise of Versailles, the politics, the art, the power has shrunk to the confines of this one room, to this one moment. The fate of the Sun King, and the future of France, will be decided in the next few minutes by the steady hand of a humble surgeon. Felix takes a deep, centering breath. He picks up the long silver probe. The world narrows. The fire crackles. He leans forward. You hear a soft, almost inaudible sound, the rustle of Felix's sleeve as he leans over you. Then you feel a cold, metallic touch. It's the silver probe, the surgeon's guide. He gently inserts it into the opening of the fistula, his touch firm but surprisingly delicate. He is mapping the terrain, confirming the path that he has rehearsed so many times in his mind and on the bodies of others. For you, this is the first physical intrusion, the chilling prelude to the main event. The room is so quiet you can hear the thumping of your own heart against the mattress. Felix withdraws the probe. There's another soft clink as he sets it down. He picks up the scalpel, the beautiful and terrible Bistari L'Oreal. This is it. There are no words of warning. No, are you ready? Your Majesty's speed is mercy. He says, simply and clearly, God give the king health, and me, your servant, wisdom. It's both a prayer and a signal. And then the pain. It is not a slow burn or a dull ache. It is an explosion. A white-hot, blinding agony that obliterates every thought, every prayer, every shred of royal dignity. It's a pure, primal, all-consuming reality. It feels as if a bolt of lightning has struck the base of your spine. Felix makes the cut. It's a single, decisive stroke, laying open the entire tract of the fistula. He is following the path he mapped with the probe, cutting through skin, muscle, and diseased tissue, undiluted torture. Your body instinctively arcs against the pain. The assistants who have been waiting for this press down on your shoulders, holding you steady. It is not an act of violence, but of necessity. They must keep you still for Felix to do his work. A muffled groan might escape your lips, a sound wrung from the very depths of your being. It's the only sign of weakness you will allow yourself. The historical accounts, particularly the one written by Felix's own son-in-law, emphasize the king's extraordinary courage. They claim he did not scream or cry out, that he endured the cut with a constancy and a firmness that were more than human. Is this true, or is it part of the official myth-making, a way to preserve the king's heroic image even in this moment of ultimate vulnerability? The debate still simmers. Some historians argue that the shock might have been so intense as to be momentarily paralyzing. Others believe Louis's legendary self-discipline was simply that powerful. He may have screamed on the inside, but the king remains silent. The first cut is just the beginning. Now Felix takes up the angled scissors. He begins to meticulously trim the edges of the wound. He is removing the hardened, unhealthy tissue that would prevent proper healing. Snippets of royal flesh are cut away. Each snip of the scissors sends a fresh, sickening jolt of pain through you. This part of the procedure is slower, more deliberate, and in some ways, worse than the initial, shocking cut. It's a sustained, methodical agony. The air in the room is now thick with the coppery smell of blood. Not a lot of blood. Felix is skilled and the area is not as vascular as, say, a limb, but enough to be a visual reminder of the violation taking place. Dear Quinn, the physician, is said to have turned away, unable to watch the brutal reality of the craft he so disdained. Here's a bizarre and little-known detail from some accounts of the surgery. It's said that throughout the entire procedure, a musician was playing a lute softly in an adjoining room. The idea was not to distract the king, what could possibly distract from such pain, but to create a semblance of normalcy, to mask any sounds from the bedchamber that might travel through the palace corridors. It's a detail so quintessentially Versailles, even in the midst of bloody, pre-anesthetic surgery. There is an element of performance, of maintaining appearances. The surgery, which feels like an eternity to you, lasts only a few minutes. Felix works with incredible speed and focus. He is in his element, a master craftsman at his bench. Finally, he puts down his tools. The cutting is ailing so likely a mixture of egg yolk, wine, and herbs. This dressing is crucial. The wound must heal from the bottom up, and the packing prevents the skin from closing over too quickly, which would just create another abscess. The pressure of the bandage itself is a new kind of pain, a deep, throbbing ache that replaces the sharp agony of the knife, but it signals the end. It's over. You have survived the grand operation. You lie there, drenched in sweat, trembling from shock and pain, but you are alive. The Sun King has passed through the fire. The last snip of the scissors has been made. The last bandage has been placed. Felix straightens up, his face slick with sweat, his professional mask finally showing a crack of profound relief. The most dangerous few minutes of his life are over. But for you, lying on that mattress, the ordeal has merely changed its form. The sharp, searing agony of the blade has been replaced by a deep, pulsing, and relentless throb that seems to emanate from your very core. Terrible moment is over, the wound's long, terrible season is just beginning. This is the moment of extreme vulnerability. You are exhausted, trembling from the physiological shock of the pain and the blood loss, however minimal. The assistants gently help you move from the makeshift operating table back into your own magnificent bed. The soft, familiar mattress feels like both a comfort and an alien landscape. Every slight movement, every shift of weight, sends a fresh wave of throbbing pain through you. Madame de Maintenon is at your side instantly, her composure finally breaking into a look of overwhelming tenderness and relief. She might take your hand, her touch a link back to the world of the living, away from the white-hot universe of pain you just inhabited. Louvois, the minister, gives a curt, satisfied nod. The state has survived its surgical trial. He quietly exits the room, his job as a witness done. Now his task is to manage the information, to ensure the secret holds. Felix and Diaquin, the surgeon and the physician, approach the bed. This is a critical moment for observation. They need to assess your state. Is there a fever coming on? Is the bleeding under control? Diaquin, back in his element now that the cutting is done, feels your pulse, checks your color, and scrutinizes your expression. His face is a mixture of professional concern and, perhaps, a newfound respect for the surgeon's brutal but effective craft. The myth-making machine of Versailles kicks into gear almost immediately. As soon as Louvois steps out of the bedchamber, he begins to control the narrative. The official story is maintained: the king is resting. To prove it, and in a display of almost unbelievable willpower, you, Louis, summon your council of ministers to your bedside just hours after the surgery. Imagine the scene: you are propped up against a mountain of pillows, pale and weak, the lower half of your body a universe of pain, but you hold court. Your ministers stand by your bed, and you discuss the budget for the navy, you sign dispatches, you govern. You are performing the act of being king, using the sheer force of your will to paper over the screaming reality of your wound. This act is as much a part of the treatment as Felix's surgery. It's a message to your court, to France, and to the world: the king is still the king. The sun has not been extinguished. This display of fortitude is something historians still marvel at. Was it pure grit? Was it the only way he knew how to cope, by retreating into the familiar rituals of his power? Or was it a calculated political move, a masterstroke of propaganda to quell any rumors of his incapacitation? It was likely all of these. Louis understood that the perception of power was power itself. Here's a small detail that speaks volumes about this strange period. For the first few days, the door to your bedchamber was not entirely closed. A select few of the highest-ranking courtiers were allowed to stand at the threshold and peer in, to see for themselves that the king was alive, awake, and working. They were not allowed to speak to you, merely to witness your survival. It was a carefully controlled piece of political theater, a living tableau designed to project strength and continuity. But behind this performance, the reality is grim. Every dressing change is a fresh agony. Felix returns daily to remove the old packing and insert a new one, ensuring the wound remains open to heal from the inside. This process is, by all accounts, excruciatingly painful, a daily reenactment of the original trauma. You have to steel yourself for it each time, another test of your legendary endurance. The blade has done its work, now begins the slow, uncertain work of healing. The manchoiku of the surgery is over, but it has stretched into long days and nights of pain, fevered dreams, and the constant, terrifying uncertainty of whether the wound will heal clean or turn septic. The fate of the kingdom hangs not on a single, dramatic cut, but on the slow, microscopic battle being waged within the king's own flesh. The immediate terrifying crisis of the surgery is past. You survived the knife. You didn't bleed to death on the table. You didn't die from the shock and pain. A collective, albeit secret, sigh of relief ripples through the inner circle of Versailles. But the game is far from won. The next few weeks are, in many ways, even more dangerous than the surgery itself. The true enemy now is not the scalpel, but the invisible world of infection. You are confined to your bed, a gilded prison. Your world has shrunk to the four posts of this magnificent piece of furniture. Outside, the life of the court continues in a state of suspended animation, the courtiers still whispering, still guessing. Inside, your life is a monotonous cycle of pain, exhaustion, and grim determination. The daily dressing changes are the focal point of your dread. Felix, your savior and your tormentor, arrives each day with his instruments and bandages. The process is a brutal necessity. The wound must be kept meticulously clean, or what passed for clean in the 17th century. The old packing, now stiff with dried blood and wound fluid, must be gently but firmly removed. This alone is agonizing, as the linen adheres to the raw, heating tissue. Then, the wound is irrigated, likely with wine or a herbal infusion, a stinging, fiery cleansing. Finally, fresh packing is inserted, a deep, invasive pressure that makes you clench your jaw and grip the silk sheets. You endure this daily torture with the same stoic silence you showed during the main event. It's a continuous test of your will. Fever is the great fear. Every night, your physicians monitor you for the slightest spike in temperature. A persistent fever would be a death sentence, a sign that laudable pus had turned into a systemic, uncontrollable infection. There are moments of panic. You have good days and bad days. Some days, the wound feels cleaner, the pain a little less sharp. On other days, a chill runs through you, a sign of a burgeoning fever, and a fresh wave of fear washes over your attendants. Dear Quinn hovers, prescribing broths and potions, his own reputation hanging by the thread of your recovery. But then slowly, miraculously, things begin to turn. The wound, which Felix inspects with the obsessive eye of a master craftsman examining his work, starts to show the right signs. Healthy pink granulation tissue begins to form at the base. The discharge becomes clearer, less purulent. These are the telltale signs that the body is winning. The flesh is knitting itself back together. The news, delivered in hushed, optimistic tones by Felix, is the first genuine glimmer of hope. The first ray of sun breaking through the clouds. You are going to make it. This is the moment when the state-controlled information machine begins to pivot. The narrative shifts from the king is resting to the king is recovering from a minor, successful procedure. The exact nature of the ailment is still kept vague, often referred to mere or a small abscess, anything to avoid the embarrassing truth, but the emphasis is now on successful. Word is allowed to leak out, first to the court, then to Paris, then to the rest of France. The king is well. The king is strong. The king has vanquished his illness. The relief is immense and immediate. The political speculators who were hedging their bets on your demise quickly and sheepishly retreat. The tension that had gripped Versailles for months finally break. The turning point is so significant that it is marked by a public celebration. On January 10th, 1687, less than 2 months after the surgery, a special tea du mayhem of thanksgiving is commissioned and performed at the chapel in Versailles. The court attends, dressed in their finest, their faces a mixture of genuine relief and calculated joy. You, the king, are not yet strong enough to attend in person, but your presence is felt. The music, composed by the great Jean-Baptiste Lully, soars to the heaven. It's a declaration of victory, a piece of musical propaganda that announces your return from the brink. This is the first light of dawn after a long dark night. The success is not just a personal victory, it is a national one. It reaffirms the narrative of the Sun King. He is not just powerful, he is divinely protected. He has faced death and emerged victorious. His body, the symbol of the state, was broken and has been repaired. The metaphor is almost too perfect. The kingdom is safe. The Te Deum has been sung and the official narrative of victory is being broadcast across the kingdom. But propaganda and reality are two very different things. While the court celebrates, you are still largely confined to your bed, engaged in the slow, unglamorous, and often frustrating work of convalescence. The path from surviving to thriving is a long and tedious one. Your bedchamber has transformed from a makeshift operating theater into the full-time seat of government. The image of you holding council meetings from your bed was not a one-off display of grit, it became your daily reality for weeks. Ministers, generals, and architects would stand by your bedside, presenting their reports and seeking your commands. You would review troop movements, approve edicts, and debate policy, all while carefully positioned on a mountain of pillows to minimize the pressure on your wound. This period is a testament to Louis's incredible discipline in the bureaucratic machine he had built. The state did not grind to a halt. In fact, some historians argue that this period of forced stillness gave Louis a different perspective, allowing him to focus on the minutiae of governance with an intensity that was difficult to achieve amidst the constant motion of normal court life. He was, quite literally, a captive audience for his ministers. The healing process itself is a series of small, frustrating steps forward and the occasional step back. The wound is closing, but it's an agonizingly slow process. There are days when you feel a surge of strength and demand to sit in a proper chair, only to find that 10 minutes is all you can endure before the pain forces you back to bed. Your famous appetite returns, but even the act of sitting at a table for a meal is a planned expedition. Here's a peculiar detail of 17th century recovery: the fear of bad air. It was widely believed that illness could be caused by miasmas, or unhealthy vapors. Your room would have been kept sealed against the damp winter air, with fires burning constantly and perfumes used to purify the atmosphere. This means your recovery took place in a stuffy, overheated, and probably quite claustrophobic environment. The psychological toll of this long confinement must have been immense for a man so accustomed to physical activity and being outdoors. You, the great hunter and horseman, can now only gaze out the window at the gardens you designed but cannot walk in. You see the courtiers strolling, laughing, living the life that you created but are temporarily barred from. This forced inactivity could lead to a kind of royal cabin fever, a deep frustration that you have to conceal beneath your usual mask of serene authority. The relationship with Felix, your surgeon, deepens and changes during this time. He is no longer just the bringer of pain. He is the architect of your recovery, the one who can read the subtle language of your healing wound. His daily visits are the most important event of your day. He brings reports of progress, reassurances, and instructions. But there's a debate among scholars about the exact nature of their bond. Was it a true friendship, or the profound gratitude of a master to a uniquely skilled servant? Whatever it was a relationship of unusual intimacy and trust, forged in shared trauma and triumph. You also have to relearn basic movements, how to stand up without putting undue stress on the wound, how to walk. Your first steps, likely taken leaning heavily on a Valenda cane, are a major milestone, a private victory celebrated only by your closest circle. Each step is tentative, painful, a reminder of the fragility that now coexists with your immense power. The slow pace of recovery allows the legend of the surgery to grow. The story, polished and perfected by court propagandists, becomes a tale of heroic endurance on your part and miraculous skill on Felix's. The pain you suffered is spun into a testament to your kingly fortitude. The brutal reality of the procedure is transformed into an elegant, divine, you are finally guided intervention. By the time you are finally ready to re-emerge fully into public life, you are not just a man who has recovered from an illness, you are a living legend who has conquered death itself. The slow, difficult recovery is the necessary cocoon from which the even more glorious Sun King is about to emerge. By the early spring of 1687, you are finally, truly on your feet. The wound has healed, leaving a scar that will serve as a permanent, private reminder of your ordeal. The long, stuffy confinement is over. The moment has come for your official return, the grand re-entry of the Sun King into the orbit of his court and his kingdom. This isn't just a matter of you starting to walk around the palace again. This is a major, carefully orchestrated event. Your first public appearance at Sunday Mass is a spectacle of the highest order. As you walk into the royal chapel at Versailles, a hush falls over the assembled court. Every eye is on you. They are not just looking at their king, they are looking for signs of weakness, for any lingering frailty. You walk slowly, perhaps with the aid of a cane, but your back is straight, your gaze is steady, your expression is one of serene and absolute authority. You are whole. The relief among the nobility is palpable, and it is quickly followed by a competitive scramble to demonstrate their joy and loyalty. This is Versailles after all, and every emotion is a performance. The news of the king's complete recovery spreads like wildfire, no longer as a managed leak, but as a triumphant public announcement. France erupts in celebration. This is not just because the people of their king, though many did, but because the king's health is a symbol of national stability and divine favor. A healthy king means peace, order, and a good harvest. His recovery is a blessing upon the entire nation. Orders are sent out from Paris to every corner of the kingdom. In cities and villages from the coast of Normandy to the mountains of the Pyrenees, the church bells ring out. Not the somber tolling for a funeral, but a joyous, chaotic peal of celebration that can go on for hours. Mayors and local magistrates declare public holidays. In the streets of Paris, the celebration is particularly wild. Wine flows freely from public fountains. Huge bonfires are lit in the city squares, their light dancing on the ancient stone buildings. People sing and dance in the streets. Special commemorative poems are written and printed on cheap broadsheets, sold for a few coins to a public hungry for every detail of the royal miracle. These poems, of course, are masterpieces of propaganda, full of heroic imagery and divine praise, conveniently leaving out the embarrassing specifics of the ailment. The official thanksgiving reaches its zenith with grand TDUMS sung in every major cathedral in France. In Notre Dame in Paris, the Archbishop himself leads a service attended by all the great dignitaries of the city. The soaring music of the choir, the clouds of incense, the glittering robes of the clergy, it's all designed to create an overwhelming sense of gratitude and awe. God has saved the king, and by extension, God has saved France. Here's a little-known fact that speaks to the scale of this celebration. Commemorative medals were struck to honor the event. These small, metal discs, bearing your profile on one side and an allegorical scene of healing or divine intervention on the other, were distributed to important figures. They were tangible souvenirs of the national trauma and recovery, a way of literally minting the king's survival into a historical fact. Historians are divided on how to interpret this nationwide outpouring of emotion. Was it a genuine expression of popular relief and affection for the monarchy, or was it a brilliantly managed campaign of state propaganda, a way for the regime to reinforce its own legitimacy after a period of uncertainty? The answer, as is often the case, is probably both. The government certainly orchestrated and encouraged the celebrations, but the enthusiasm of the crowd seems to have been largely genuine. The king was the sun of their world, and his return from the shadows was a cause for real joy. For you, the object of all this adoration, it must be a surreal experience. Just a few months ago, you were a man brought to his knees by a humiliating affliction, facing a terrifying surgical ordeal. Now, you are the hero of a national epic, your suffering transformed into a symbol of divine grace. You have not just recovered your health, you have gained a new layer of mythology. The scar you bear is no longer a mark of shame but a badge of honor, a secret testament to the time the Sun King stared into the abyss and did not blink. The official celebrations are over, the bonfires have died down, and the church bells are silent. But at Versailles, the aftershocks of your surgery are just beginning to create one of the most bizarre and frankly ridiculous trends in the history of fashion. The court, having processed its fear and relief, now needs to find a new way to engage with the royal experience. and they do so in the only way they know how, by turning it into a competition for status. The problem for the courtiers is this: how do you show your supreme loyalty and empathy for a king who has just endured a secret, painful, and embarrassing ordeal? You can't just say, "So sorry to hear about your fistula, Your Majesty." That would be a catastrophic breach of etiquette. You need a more subtle, more performative way to express your solidarity. And so the great pretense begins. It starts subtly. A high-ranking duke, known for his political cunning, is seen walking through the Hall of Mirrors with a slight, almost imperceptible limp. He winces, just a little, as he sits down to play cards. When a concerned friend asks if he is unwell, he might sigh and gesture vaguely towards his lower back, muttering something about a bit of a bother. He is, of course, perfectly healthy. Soon another courtier, perhaps a rival of the first, is seen shifting uncomfortably on his stool during chapel. He has a pained but stoic expression on his face, a perfect imitation of the look you yourself mastered during your recovery. The trend catches on like wildfire. Suddenly, it seems as if an epidemic of phantom fistulas has swept through the ranks of the French aristocracy. This becomes the ultimate status symbol, the height of fashionable suffering. To be in at court in the spring of 1687, you need to pretend you have had the same surgery as the king. It's a way of saying, "I am so close to the king, so in tune with his life that I share his most intimate suffering." It's a silent, coded message of supreme loyalty and access. The performance becomes more and more elaborate. Nobles begin appearing at court with their backsides ostentatiously bandaged. They would have their valets wrap them in layers of fine linen, creating a noticeable bulge under their silk breeches. These bandages are not hidden, they are displayed. They are a fashion accessory, like a jeweled sword or a perfectly powdered wig. The way they walk becomes a piece of theatre. Courtiers practice a specific gait, a sort of elegant, pained swagger, known as the royal walk. They learn to lower themselves into a chair with a carefully calibrated groan of discomfort. There is a comical aspect to it that is hard to overstate. Imagine the most magnificent palace in the world, filled with hundreds of the most powerful and wealthy people in Europe, and a significant number of them are waddling around like penguins, pretending their bottoms hurt. Here's a curious tidbit about this trend: it wasn't just for the men. Ambitious women of the court also got in on the act. A marquise might complain to her friends about the discomfort of sitting in her carriage, hinting at a secret ailment that mirrored the king's. It was a universal signifier of being on the inside track. Historians are still fascinated by this phenomenon. Was it purely sycophantic, a desperate attempt to curry favor with a king who had just proven his resilience? Or was there something deeper at play? Some scholars argue it was a collective psychological response to the trauma the court had just experienced. They had all lived in fear of your death, and now, by comically play-acting your ailment, they were diffusing that inside joke. It was a collective inside joke, and the punchline was a fake fistula. Of course, not everyone participated. Those who were out of favor or who found the whole thing absurd would have watched from the sidelines. But to be part of the inner circle, to show you were truly one of the king's own, you had to join the charade. The demand for linen bandages at Versailles must have skyrocketed. Tailors probably had to learn to cut breeches with a little extra room in the seat. The grand operation had given birth to its absurd, fashionable child, the grand affectation. The trend is now in full swing. Versailles has been transformed into a grand stage for a play of competitive convalescence. Let's zoom in on the details of this absurd performance to really appreciate the artistry and commitment of the fakers. You are walking through the gardens of Versailles, finally strong enough to enjoy the crisp air and the geometric perfection of your creation. And you see them everywhere. A count is strolling with his wife, his posture just a little too brave. He leans heavily on his cane, a prop that has become an essential part of the fistula fashionerose's wardrobe. It's not just any old walking stick, it's an elegant, silver-topped affair, a sign that his suffering is as refined and expensive as he is. Then you see a group of young, ambitious noblemen near one of the fountains. They are not engaged in lively conversation. Instead, they are subtly competing to see who can best perform the ritual of sitting down. One lowers himself onto the marble bench with a slow, agonizing precision, his hand pressed to his lower back. Another, not to be outdone, lets out a tiny, almost inaudible hiss of pain as he makes contact with the stone, his eyes closing for a brief, dramatic moment. Ridiculous play, and you are the only person in the world who is both the author and the audience. What must you have thought? Seeing this, were you amused, flattered, or perhaps a little repulsed by the trivial elation of the very real agony? You endured. The historical record is silent on Lewis's personal reaction to the trend, which is a source of great debate. Some historians believe that, as a master of court politics, you would have recognized it for what it was, a powerful, if bizarre, reaffirmation of his central place in their universe. Their imitation was the sincerest and strangest form of flattery. He may have been privately entertained by the sheer absurdity of it all. Let's dissect the costume. The bandage is key. It wasn't just a wad of cloth. For the truly dedicated trendsetter, the bandage was a multi-layered, carefully constructed accessory. It had to create a visible but not too grotesque bulge beneath the tight-fitting silk breeches of the era. The goal was to suggest, not to shock. It was a delicate balance. Too small, and no one would notice your devotion. Too large, and you'd look like you were smuggling a melon, which was simply poor taste. Valets would have been given special instructions on how to dress the wound that wasn't there. And then there's the movement. The royal walk was more than just a limp. It was a comprehensive piece of physical theater. It involved keeping the torso rigid, taking shorter, more deliberate steps, and avoiding any sudden turns. Getting up from a chair was a multi-act play, starting with a moment of pensive preparation, followed by a slow, controlled push-off, and ending with a subtle wince of triumph. Who had spent their lives practicing the graceful bows and intricate dance steps of the court, now applied that same bodily discipline to faking a surgical recovery. Here's a little-known but highly illustrative anecdote. It's said that some courtiers went so far as to discreetly consult with actual surgeons to get the details right. They would ask questions about the nature of the pain, the proper way to hold oneself, the expected recovery time. They wanted their performance to be as authentic as possible. They were the method actors of sycophancy. This bizarre fashion tells us something profound about the nature of life at Versailles. It was a world where appearance was reality. What you did was less important than what you were seen to be doing. Your inner feelings were irrelevant. Your outward performance was everything. In this context, faking a fistula wasn't an act of dishonesty. It was an act of dishonesty. It was an act of social communication. A way of broadcasting your allegiance on the correct frequency. The fad probably lasted for a few intense months, the spring and summer of 1687, before fading away as a new obsession inevitably took its place. But it left its mark. It was a moment when the court's hermetically sealed, self-referential nature was on full display. They had taken the king's intensely private suffering and turned it into a public, competitive spectacle. It was the ultimate tribute in a world built on tribute to not just honor the king, but to become a pale, limping, elegantly bandaged imitation of him. While the peacocks of the court are busy perfecting their pain swaggeresque, the man who started it all, the humble Surgeon Charles Francois Felix, finds his life has been transformed beyond all recognition. He went into that royal bedchamber a skilled craftsman, a man of a lower social station. He emerged a national hero. For Felix, the end of your recovery period marks the beginning of his reward. And you, the king, are not a man who does things by halves, especially when it comes to gratitude. The rewards bestowed upon Felix are staggering, and they are designed to be as public as the surgery was secret. First, there is the money. You pay Felix a fee that is astronomical by any standard of the time. The exact sum is a matter of historical debate. But the most commonly cited figure is around 300,000 livres. To put that in perspective, a skilled laborer might earn 300 livres in a year. A country priest might have an annual income of 500. You have given your surgeon a fortune that is hundreds of times the annual income of an ordinary person. It's a life-changing, dynasty-creating amount of wealth, but the reward is not just financial. In the rigid, hierarchical world of 17th century France, money is good, but stat is everything. And you give Felix status and spades. You grant him a title of nobility. He is no longer just Monsieur Felix, the craftsman. He is now the Sieur de Tiassi, a title attached to a piece of land. He has been elevated from the bourgeoisie to the landed gentry. His children will be born into the aristocracy. This is a social leap of incredible proportions, the dream of every ambitious commoner in France. And the gifts keep coming. You present him with a magnificent country estate near Versailles. This isn't just a house, it's a symbol. It's a visible, tangible sign of his new place in the world. He now owns land, a key marker of nobility. He can ride out from his chateau, survey his domain, a lord of the manor. The man who once worked in a bloody apron now has tenants who bow to him. This elevation of a surgeon sends shockwaves through the medical and social establishment. The physicians, like dear Quinn, who had always looked down on surgeons as mere manual laborers, are now forced to reckon with a new reality. Felix, the man they called in when their own theories failed, is now a wealthy, titled landowner with a country estate. He has eclipsed them in both fortune and royal favor. This created a certain amount of professional jealousy and tension. We can imagine the grumbling in the Faculty of Medicine in Paris. They would have seen Felix's rise as an affront to the natural order of things. A man who works with his hands has been rewarded more lavishly than men who work with their minds. It's a scandal, but they could do nothing about it. Here's a small telling detail about Felix's newfound status. He was given a personal coat of arms, designed and approved by the royal heralds. A coat of arms was the ultimate symbol of noble lineage. It's said that his new crest cleverly and discreetly incorporated a sun éclair, a clear nod to his service to the Sun King, and a small, stylized fistula, forever linking his family's honor to the king's famous affliction. The veracity of the fistula and the crest is debated by some historians, who suggest it might be a later, more colorful embellishment to the story, but it perfectly captures the spirit of his reward. His family's glory was born from the king's private pain. What did Felix do with his newfound wealth and status? By all accounts, he handled it with intelligence and grace. He did not become a flamboyant spendthrift. He managed his estate, provided for his family, and continued to practice surgery. Now as the most famous and respected surgeon in all of Europe, his reputation was unassailable. He had performed the most dangerous, high-stakes operation imaginable and succeeded. Kings and princes from other nations would now seek out his opinion. Felix's story is a remarkable tale of social mobility. It's a testament to his skill and nerve, but also to Louis XIV's character. The king, for all his obsession with etiquette and hierarchy, was also a pragmatist who recognized and rewarded talent wherever he found it. By so lavishly honoring his surgeon, Louis wasn't just paying a debt, he was making a statement that competence and loyalty in the service of the king were virtues that could transcend the rigid boundaries of class. The humble surgeon had become a great lord, his fortune built not on ancient bloodlines but on the skill of his own two hands. Felix's personal triumph was more than just one man's rags to riches story. The grand operation had consequences that rippled out far beyond the walls of Versailles and the bank account of one surgeon. Your successful surgery became a pivotal moment in the history of medicine, triggering a slow but irreversible revolution in the status of surgery itself. Before 1696, as we've discussed, surgeons were at the bottom of the medical totem pole. They were the blue-collar workers of the healing arts. Physicians were the white-collar intellectuals, theorized and prescribed. The surgeons cut, sawed, and stitched. It was a division between the head and the hand, and the head was considered infinitely superior. But your case changed the game. Here was a problem, the most famous medical case in the world that the best physicians in France, with all their ancient Greek theories and Latin jargon, could not solve. It was the lowly surgeon, with his practical knowledge of anatomy and his skill with a blade, who saved the day. And the king, by so publicly and lavishly rewarding Felix, sent a powerful message to the world: the hand was just as important as the head. This royal seal of approval gave surgery legitimacy and prestige it had never known. The success of the operation was discussed in medical faculties across Europe. The specific techniques Felix used, and the innovative instruments he designed, were studied and copied. He had not just cured a king, he had established a new gold standard for a difficult procedure. His work was published, or at least accounts of it were, and his methods became part of the surgical canon. This led to a gradual but profound shift. Surgery began its long, slow climb from being a manual trade to becoming a respected scientific discipline. Ambitious and intelligent young men, who might have previously only considered a career in academic medicine, now saw surgery as a viable path to fame and fortune. If a surgeon could become a nobleman with a country estate, then it was clearly a profession on the rise. Here's a specific example of the change in the years following your operation. Louis established a dedicated chair for surgery at the Jardin du Roi in Paris, a royal botanical garden and center for scientific research. This was a significant step. It created a formal, royally funded position for the teaching of advanced surgical techniques, placing it within a respected scientific institution. It was a move to professionalize and standardize surgical education, to lift it out of the old apprenticeship model and into the world of academic science. Furthermore, the public's perception of surgeons began to change. They were no longer just the tooth pullers and battlefield butchers. They were seen as skilled, life-saving practitioners. The story of the King's fistula operation became a popular tale, a piece of medical folklore. And in that story, the hero was not the physician but the surgeon. This shift in status is a subject of ongoing discussion for medical historians. They debate how quickly the change happened and how widespread it was. It wasn't an overnight revolution. The old prejudices and hierarchies were deeply entrenched and took a long time to die. Physicians continued to see themselves as the elite of the medical world for at least another century. However, the 1686 operation is almost universally seen as the crucial turning point, the event that planted the seed for the modern conception of the surgeon as a highly trained and respected medical specialist. A little-known consequence of the operation was its effect on the study of anatomy. Felix's success was based on his intimate, practical knowledge of the body structures. This reinforced the idea that effective surgery depended on precise anatomical understanding, not on abstract theories about humors. It gave a boost to the practice of dissection and the creation of detailed anatomical atlases, which became increasingly important tools for training the next generation of surgeons. So, while you were simply trying to solve a painful and personal problem, you inadvertently became a catalyst for a major medical reformation. Your scar was a testament not only to your own endurance, but it also became a symbol of a turning point in science, the moment when surgery began to step out of the shadows of the barbershop and into the bright, clear light of a modern medical discipline. You have returned to the rhythm of your life. You walk the glorious halls of Versailles, you hunt in the forests of Compiègne, you preside over the endless ceremonies of the court. On the surface, the Sun King is the same as he ever was, perhaps even more radiant, burnished by his brush with mortality. But the question that hangs in the air, a question that historians still love to debate, is whether the experience truly changed the man inside. Did the great fistula operation humble the Sun King? Its a tempting narrative. The all-powerful semi-divine monarch, brought low by a common and humiliating ailment, is forced to confront his own fragile humanity. Through this suffering, he learns humility, gains empathy, and becomes a wiser, more compassionate ruler. It's a perfect story of personal growth and redemption. But the reality, as with most things concerning Louis XIV, is far more complex. On one hand, there is some evidence to support the humbling theory. In the years after the surgery, some observers noted a deepening of the king's religious piety. His relationship with the devout Madame de Maintenon grew even stronger, and the general atmosphere at court became slightly less libertine and more outwardly moral. You could argue that staring his own mortality in the face, and believing his survival to be an act of God's grace, genuinely affected his spiritual life. He had been given a second chance, and perhaps he felt a renewed obligation to live up to his title as the most Christian king. He also showed a newfound and lasting respect for the world of medicine, particularly surgery. His patronage of Felix and the establishment of surgical teaching posts were not fleeting acts of gratitude. They represented a genuine shift in his perspective. He, who had experienced the failure of theoretical medicine and the triumph of practical skill, now understood the value of empirical knowledge in a way he hadn't before. You could say the experience made him a more modern, more scientific-minded patron. However, there is a powerful counterargument that the experience did not humble him at all, but rather reinforced his sense of exceptionalness. From this point of view, he didn't see the ordeal as a sign that he was just like any other man. Instead, he saw his survival as definitive proof that he was not like any other man. He had endured unimaginable pain without screaming. He had undergone a life-threatening procedure and recovered flawlessly. He had even continued to govern from his who but a divinely chosen hero could do such a thing. In this interpretation, the surgery didn't chip away at his ego, it added another layer to his legend. It became another chapter in the epic of Louis the Great. He had conquered foreign armies, he had tamed the nobility, and now he had even conquered his own rebellious flesh. His survival wasn't a lesson in humility, it was the ultimate validation of his extraordinary nature. Historians who subscribed to this view point to his actions in the years that followed. His reign continued to be defined by absolute authority, immense state spending on wars and palaces, and a firm belief in his own divinely ordained glory. He did not suddenly start mingling with commoners or questioning the rigid hierarchy he had perfected. The sun, having passed through its brief eclipse, seemed to shine even more brightly, with an even greater sense of its own importance. Here's a small but fascinating piece of the puzzle that scholars examine the way the event was officially recorded and memorialized. The court artisan poets did not depict a man in pain and fear. They created images and odes celebrating the king's health restored. The narrative was one of triumph, not of suffering. The focus was on the miraculous outcome, not the humbling process. This suggests that the official state-sanctioned takeaway was one of strength, not vulnerability. So, which was it, the humbled king or the emboldened hero? The truth probably lies somewhere in the murky middle. It's unlikely that such a profound experience left him entirely unchanged. He was, after all, human. He must have carried the memory of the pain and fear with him for the rest of his life. But Louis XIV's personality was a fortress, built over a lifetime to project unwavering strength and authority. Perhaps the ordeal added a new, private chamber of introspection and piety to that fortress, but it did not, and could not tear down the golden walls. He remained the Sun King, a man convinced of his own greatness, but now with a scar to remind him of the price of mortality. As you re-emerged into the full splendor of court life, the celebrations of your recovery continue to resonate. The entire artistic and cultural machine of France, which is essentially an extension of your own will, is mobilized to commemorate this great victory. Poems are written, medals are struck, and most enduringly, music is composed. And it's here that we find one of the most charming, undebated little offshoots of your medical drama. The story goes like this: in the wave of creative fervor following your return to health, a special hymn is composed. It's written by a noblewoman of the court, the Duchesse de Brinon, then the music is supplied by the master of the royal chapel, the great Jean-Baptiste Lully. The hymn is performed for you at Versailles. The lyrics are simple, a heartfelt prayer of gratitude and loyalty. They begin with the words Grand Duce of le Roi, Long vie Roi, qual soit victorie euec, which translates to Great God save the King, long live the King, may he be victorious. It's a beautiful piece, perfectly capturing the mood of the moment. It is performed. It is appreciated. And then, like most occasional pieces, it should have faded into the historical background. But, according to a very persistent theory, it didn't. Fast forward about 30 years. In 1714, the German-born composer George Friedrich Handel is visiting Paris. He's a musical magpie, always collecting tunes and ideas. The theory, and it is a hotly contested one, is that Handel heard this old Lully hymn during his visit. He was taken with the simple, powerful melody and filed it away in his memory. Years later, back in England and now composer for the British court, he is tasked with writing a patriotic anthem, Ruexit, and it becomes God Save the King or Queen, the national anthem of Great Britain. Is this story true? This is one of those delightful little corners of history where scholars just love to argue. There is no definitive proof, no smoking gun manuscript that shows Handel copying Lully. The first documented performances of God Save the King in England are from the 1742, decades after Lully's death and Handel's supposed visit. The arguments against the theory are strong. The melody is quite simple, and supporters of a purely British origin argue that it could easily have been a case of parallel musical evolution. Simple, hymn-like tunes often share similar characteristics. They point to other possible British folk melodies or plain chant traditions as more likely sources. To them, the Lully story is just a piece of French cultural chauvinism, an attempt to claim credit for their rival's most famous song. But the arguments for the theory are tantalizing. The melodic contours are strikingly similar. The sentiment of the lyrics is identical. And the historical timeline, while not proven, is certainly plausible. Handel was in the right place at the right time. Furthermore, the story was widely reported in French publications in the 18th century, presented as fact. For example, a popular French music encyclopedia from the 1782, the memoir Secrets d'Aviation, states it plainly: the English have appropriated this tune and made it their national anthem. So what are we to believe? It remains one of those academic mystery boxes. There isn't enough evidence to convict Handel of plagiarism, but there's too much smoke to dismiss the fire completely. It's a delicious historical what-if. Imagine the irony if it is true. The national anthem of Great Britain, a country that was one of your greatest rivals, a song sung for centuries at coronations, military parades, and sporting events, might have its origins in a hymn celebrating the healing of your royal backside. It's a perfect example of how history works in strange and unpredictable ways. A private medical crisis in a French palace could have given birth to the soundtrack of the British Empire. Regardless of whether the anthem story is true, the creation of the original hymn is a historical fact. It shows how every aspect of your life, even your health, was a matter for public, artistic consumption. Your fistula didn't just inspire bizarre-fashioned rendit, may have inspired a piece of music that would echo through the centuries, a faint, melodic ghost of your grand operation. The celebrations have faded, the fashionable bandages have been unwound, and the triumphant hymns are now just part of the chapel's repertoire. Life has returned to its magnificent, glittering normal. But what became of the tools that made it all possible? What was the fate of that bespoke surgical instruments? The royal proband, the Bistar à l'Orient, forged in secrecy and baptized in royal blood. These were no ordinary tools. They were the physical embodiment of a national crisis and its triumphant resolution. They were both medical artifacts of immense importance and, in a way, relics. They had touched the king's body and delivered him from a mortal threat. In an age that still held a deep reverence for physical objects associated with royalty and great events, these instruments were powerfully symbolic. Their immediate fate, of course, was to be in the proud possession of their creator and wielder, Charles Francois Felix. For him, they were the ultimate proof of his skill and the source of his new fortune and status. He would have kept them in magnificent velvet-lined case, perhaps showing them to a few select and trusted colleagues, a tangible reminder of his greatest professional achievement. They were his diploma, his trophy, and his masterpiece all rolled into one. But what happens after Felix? This is where the story gets a little murky, and historians have to piece together clues from various archives and records. The instruments were far too important to be simply discarded or melted down. They represented a key moment in the history of the monarchy and the history of surgery. One strong possibility is that they were preserved as a kind of family heirloom, passed down through the generations of Felix's newly ennobled descendants. They would have been a prized possession, a constant reminder of the singular event that elevated their family from the ranks of the bourgeoisie to the aristocracy. We can imagine the Sieur Etiassi, Felix's son or grandson, showing the case to a visitor at his country chateau, telling the now legendary story of his ancestors' courage and skill. However, such important objects, so closely tied to the king himself, often find their way into national collections. It's highly probable that at some point, either during Felix's lifetime or after his death, the instruments were acquired by the crown. They might have been placed in the king's private collection of curiosities and scientific objects, a testament to a pivotal moment in his reign. The most likely long-term home for them would have been one of the burgeoning medical or scientific academies in Paris. As surgery gained prestige, the tools that took a key role in that elevation would have become objects of intense interest. They could have been used as teaching aids, shown to students as the pinnacle of surgical instrument design. This, a professor might say, holding up the elegant silver scalpel, is what saved the king. This is the standard to which you must aspire. A little-known fact that complicates the search for the original instruments is that copies were almost certainly made. Felix's designs were surgeons would have immediately wanted to replicate them. Cutlers would have produced XIV fistula probes and scalpels. This means that many 17th and 18th century surgical kits might contain instruments that look very similar to the royal originals. Historical artifacts from the contemporary copies becomes a huge challenge for museum curators and historians. So where are they today? This is the great question, and the answer is, frustratingly, we don't know for sure. There is no single, universally accepted, verified set of Louis XIV's fistula surgery instruments on display in a major museum. The chaos of the French Revolution at the end of the 18th century saw many royal and aristocratic collections looted, destroyed, or dispersed. It's tragically plausible that the original silver instruments were simply melted down for their bullion value during this period of turmoil, their immense historical significance lost on those who saw them only as a few ounces of precious metal. Yet, hope remains. Various museums of medicine and history in France and around the world hold 17th century surgical tools that could be the originals or early copies. The debate over their provenance is a quiet, academic version of the search for the Holy Grail. Curators analyze the maker's marks, the precise design, comparing them against the few surviving drawings and descriptions. Perhaps one day, a definitive link will be made, or perhaps they are still out there, sitting forgotten in a dusty private collection, their incredible story waiting to be rediscovered. The fate of those shiny silver tools remains one of the last, tantalizing mysteries of your great ordeal. The years roll by. The bizarre fashion of the phantom fistula has long since faded, replaced by new courtly obsessions. Felix DTSE enjoys his well-earned status as a noble lord. The world moves on, but the memory of the grand operation never truly disappears from Versailles. It has been absorbed into the palace's very architecture, not as stone and marble, but as stone and marble, but as story and memory. It becomes a permanent part of the lore of the place. You are older now, the Sun King in his august later years. You walk through the hall of mirrors, and the reflection that looks back at you is no longer the virile, dark-haired youth who first dreamed of this palace. It's a more somber, more imposing figure, a living monument to an entire era. And as you pass a certain alcove or wing containing your old bedchamber, a fleeting memory might surface, a ghost of a pain, a whisper of a fear long conquered. The fistula affair becomes one of the great inside stories of your reign. For the courtiers who lived through the period of uncertainty, it's a shared memory that binds them together. It's a story to be told in hushed, dramatic tones to the younger generation of nobles who are just arriving at court. You see that portrait of the king from 1687, an old duke might say to a wide-eyed young baron. He looks magnificent. Does he not? Well, let me tell you what was really happening. The story becomes a benchmark, a test of one's knowledge of the court's secret history. To know the true story of the fistula, not the vague, sanitized public version, but the real, gritty details, is a sign that you are a true insider. It's a piece of social currency, a bit of gossip polished over the decades until it shines like a jewel. The details might get exaggerated over time. The number of Felix's practice subjects might grow. The king's stoicism might become even more superhuman in the retelling. The story evolves from a historical event into a courtly legend. And the scar, it remains your most private secret. The one part of your body that is never on public display, the one piece of you that is not owned by the state or the ceremony of the court. It is the permanent, physical record of your vulnerability. A few trusted valets would have been the only people to see it in the later years of your life. For them, it would have been an object of almost holy reverence, the mark left by the event that proved the king was both mortal and unconquerable. Here's a small, poignant detail to consider. Louis XIV outlived almost everyone involved in the original drama. He outlived his brilliant surgeon, Felix. He outlived his physician, Quin. He outlived his powerful minister, Louvois. He became the sole living repository of the true, unvarnished memory. The historical debate about the long-term impact of the event continues to this day, which keeps the memory alive in a different way. For scholars, your fistula is a perfect case study. It touches on politics, medicine, court, society, psychology, and even fashion. Academics can build entire careers analyzing this single event from different angles. It is a gift that keeps on giving, a rich vein of historical inquiry that never seems to be exhausted. Versailles itself is a palace of memories, and this tasteless but pivotal episode is woven into its invisible tapestry. It's there in the quiet dignity of the royal chapel where the Te Deum was sung. It's there in the opulent bedchamber where the portraits that show a king projecting strength while hiding a painful secret. The crisis is over, the wound is healed, but the story has left an indelible scar on the memory of the palace itself. A permanent reminder of the day the fate of the glorious Sun King depended entirely on the steady hand of a humble surgeon. We've walked the glittering halls of Versailles, we've lingered in the secret surgical wards of Paris, and we've felt the white-hot pain of the royal scalpel. Now, let's pull back, let the noise of the court fade away, and look at the whole picture one last time. What does this strange, intimate, and frankly bizarre episode really tell us? It reveals the ultimate paradox of absolute monarchy. It shows us the Sun King's most profoundly human moment. For your entire life, you were more than a man. You were an institution, a symbol, a living embodiment of France. Your birth was a state event, your daily routines were public rituals, and your body was a metaphor for the health of the kingdom. The mythology you and your court so carefully constructed was one of divine right, of effortless superiority, of a life lived on a plane far above that of ordinary mortals. You were the sun, and everyone else merely a planet revolving around you. And then came the fistula, a problem so mundane, so physical, so deeply democratically human. It respected no hierarchy. It didn't care about divine right. It was a rebellion not of starving peasants or ambitious dukes, but of your own flesh. This tiny, infected tunnel of tissue achieved what no foreign army or court conspiracy ever could have brought the Sun King down to earth. This entire saga is a story of contrasts. The magnificent, glittering palace of Versailles versus the small, dark, infected wound. The absolute, unquestioned power of the monarch versus his complete and utter dependence on the skill of a low-born surgeon. The public performance of godlike perfection versus the private, lonely reality of pain and fear. It is in these contrasts that we find the real Louis. Not Louis the Great, the Sun King of the portraits, but Louis the man. The surgery itself is the ultimate stripping away of the myth. Lying face down on that simple mattress, you are not a king. You are a body, a collection of tissues and nerves, in the hands of another man. In that moment, your crown, your titles, your palaces, your armies, they are all utterly useless. Your only resources are your own courage and the surgeon's skill. It is the great equalizer. Historians still argue about whether Louis XIV was a great man. Was he a visionary leader who brought France to the zenith of its power and cultural influence? Or was he a vaingly restaurant who bankrupted his country with endless wars and extravagant building projects? Both views have merit. But the story of the fistula allows us to see him outside of those grand historical debates. It allows us to see him as a character. A man of incredible self-discipline, of profound faith, and of pragmatic intelligence. A man who, when faced with a terrifying, unhumiliating crisis, did not crumble. He assessed the situation, chose the best available expert, endured the horrific cure, and got back to the business of being king. And that perhaps is the final, most human lesson of this story. Your power was not just in your title or your divine right. Your true power was revealed when all of that was stripped away. It was in your will. The will to endure the pain. The will to project strength even in your moment of greatest weakness. The will to get up, day after day, and govern from a bed of agony. The fistula did not make you mortal. You were mortal all along. What it did was hold up a mirror, forcing you and the world to see the man behind the golden mask. It revealed that the sun, for all its dazzling, divine light, was also made of ordinary, fragile, and ultimately resilient human matter. It was your most vulnerable moment, and in a strange and profound way, It may just have been your finest hour. And now, the story is over. The great palace of Versailles grows quiet and dark. The echo of Lully's lute fades into the long corridors. The courtiers with their silks and their secrets have all retired. The last candle has been snuffed out. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to soft glowing embers. You can feel the journey ending. Your mind, which has been wandering through the 17th century, begins to drift back, slowly, gently. The crisp details of the story start to soften at the edges, blurring the way a landscape does in the twilight. The face of the king, the glint of the silver scalpel, the rustle of a courtier's sleeve. It all recedes, becoming less of a story you are hearing and more of a dream you are having. Feel the weight of your own body, comfortable and at peace. There is no council of ministers to attend, no painful wound to endure. There is only the soft, steady rhythm of your own breathing, in and out, a gentle tide that carries you further away from the waking world. Let the lingering thoughts of kings and castles dissolve like sugar in warm water. They are just whispers now, echoes in a vast and quiet space. You are floating in that peaceful space, suspended in the soft darkness between story and sleep. Your journey is done. It is time to rest. The end of the article. Good night.